Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Classroom Matters with me, your host, Christy Houle. And I am speaking today with author and TED speaker, Nathaniel Turner. And now, Nathaniel, Nate, see, what do you prefer?
Nate, unless I'm going to be in trouble with you.
Okay, well, maybe we'll see. We'll see. All right, we'll start with Nate. Nate is a self-described humanity propulsion engineer, and I wanted him to go into that a little bit further in the episode, what exactly that means. Right. And he is also the author of several books, including the children's book series, The Amazing World of STEM, and his history-making book, Raising Supaman. As a zealous advocate for the idea that every person has an opportunity to maximize their human potential, Nate regularly shares his theory of a backward design life process, which I also really want to talk about in depth, with parents, teachers, and students. What truly sets Nate apart from others is his unique comical ability not only to see the world differently, but to challenge his audiences in an edutaining, did I get that right?
You did.
I didn't come up with that word. Nate did. An edutaining way to live outside the box so that the world might be able to experience us at our very best. Nate, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I love that introduction.
Yes. We could just end with that, right?
The end. Thanks for joining us, everybody. See you next time.
Exactly.
So let's kind of go back and start at the beginning, because you have so many interesting things about you. You're doing so many wonderful things that affect teachers and kids and parents. But I want to sort of go back to your background and your journey into some of the work that you're currently doing.
Okay. You want me to just start with something?
I want you just like, where were you born? What's your favorite color?
Yeah. So I was born in Gary, Indiana, or as people who are some people from Gary affectionately call it GI or Gangsta Island. So I was born and raised in Gary. My family, my family that's still living, my mom lives in Maryville. My father passed a few years ago. I have a grandmother who's still there, but most of my family is no longer in Gary. I was in Gary until 1983 when I went to college at Butler University here in Indianapolis. And I was here in Indianapolis for the first stint until 1988. And I moved back to the region and attended law school at Valparaiso University and graduate school there. And then I swore off when I was in undergrad that I would ever come back to Indianapolis unless I had a wife and children. And I had a wife and child, and I found myself back here in this area. And hopefully not for long. My son is no longer here, so I still have the same wife. So I think she's okay with leaving here as well.
That's awesome. So, and if we have any listeners from Gary, Indiana, not to say that it's probably not a lovely place. Maybe it just doesn't fit me.
The interesting thing is that the Gary that we see today is not exactly the Gary that I was born into. Now It started to change, of course, in the 80s, and we were known as the murder capital of the world and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure we'll get into it later, but there was a close-knit group of people that formed a village that actually helped me to be whatever I am today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So I want to talk a little bit about, you've written 5 books so far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
But I want to specifically jump into Raising Supaman.
Okay.
You were kind enough to send me a copy of all your books. I have them all, read through all of them since I've had them. And so Raising Supaman was really an interesting book. So talk a little bit about that book and where the idea for that book came from.
So I had a precarious relationship. That's the polite word of saying the relationship that I had with my father. Upon learning that I was going to be a parent, one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that I was better than my father, which in some ways I thought wasn't going to require a lot. Time does a number of things. Obviously, time heals a lot of things, but time also gives you a different perspective. I have great respect for some of the things that my father did to me that he was doing for me today. But in learning that I was going to be a father, I wanted to make sure that I at least had some memories, but my son had some memories of some times that were good between the two of us in the event that I messed things up like my father. Throughout my childhood, my mother would say, when you were small, your father, you had a great relationship. And I was like, I don't remember that. And as I got older and we got further and further apart, that I had no memories that were good. And I decided that I wanted to at least provide some good memories for my son. So initially I just started taking notes of things that I'd hope for him. And then one afternoon, one July afternoon, like now in 1998, my then 2-year-old son said, "Dad, I want mail," as he walked to the mailbox with me. And I bought some green cards and postcards from Target and started to write things that I wanted him to know, and realized I didn't have enough space. And decided enough of the postcards and greeting cards, I would just write him letters. And I just started writing him letters. He decided to learn to read from the letters that I wrote him. And then at some point, I realized that writing him was a very effective way to communicate with him, because he would hear the inflection in my voice or see the look on my face and decide that maybe I meant something that I didn't actually mean, or I could be angry, and the letters helped me to put aside kind of the emotionality and then just write him about something that was more mission driven or had a purpose or a process. And so that's the origin of those letters.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's such a powerful story. And I wanted to get that out there because I think it's really important for people listening and for people that are interested in possibly purchasing and reading that book to know that story that is behind how that book got started. And I think that's going to hit a nerve in a lot of folks, regardless of their age, whether they're a student that might be listening thinking, wow, that could be something fantastic I could do with my father or my mother or anyone in their family, really. But it really encompasses the so many humanistic things that we're missing in our lives from all different aspects, right? So you're learning with your child is learning with you and through you through these letters. Forget about all the academic stuff they're learning about letter writing and reading and all of these things. But, having those, I'm sure is going to be very, very special to him and to his children. And so how did that impact his life and your life after that book was written, now that it's out there? Has that had a big impact on you from your readers?
So, I think, we and I talked earlier, the decision to publish the letters, that was his decision. I had no intention to ever sharing the letters with anyone or any group of people publicly. When we were in Brazil, when he was living in Brazil, and I left him at the academy, and I went back to check on him, and I'd given him some of the letters I'd written in a binder, because I should backtrack. He moved to Brazil as a 16-year-old to chase his dream of playing professional soccer. While he was there, my wife didn't think he was going to be able to stay. She thought he wasn't emotionally mature to make that leap. So I went to Rio for a few days, because all men should go to Rio by themselves for a few days. And my wife calls
Nathaniel.
to check on me. Yes, my wife calls to check on me, and she says, "Hey, you're going to have to go back to the academy. He's not doing well." And I go back to the academy, and he has the binder with the letters, and he says, "Did you put these letters in any particular order?" I reread the first 3 letters. I remember my purpose. I'm going to be fine. But Dad, here's what we're going to do. Whenever I return, we're going to take these letters, we're going to publish them and share them with other families, because when you tell me something, I know it's supposed to happen. Not only do I believe it's supposed to happen, I know it's going to happen. And so when he returned 18 months or so later, he did all the work to publish it. He negotiated with an artist to do the book design. He helped find someone who edited the book. He's the one that I think we used Amazon Kindle books initially to publish the book. He did all of the legwork. So that was him. So to answer your question, he decided the letters had enough value not only to him, but he thought they would be valuable to other people, that he passed them out. And I've seen him now he's now 26, but as an undergraduate student, he bought copies of the book or gave copies of the book to the kids who were involved with him with Nesby. And he shared this letter about dreams with folks and wrote it on the top of his graduation cap, that dreams lift us up. So I think the letters have played a huge role in his life.
Yeah, it really sounds like it has. And absolutely. I mean, what a powerful thing. So let's sort of flip the focus a little bit, but I want to stick with some of the books you've written, because I want to talk about the educational side of things that you do. Okay. You've also written a great book called The Amazing World of STEM. And what a cute character. I've read the book. My youngest son and I have read the book together. So talk to us a little bit about The Amazing World of STEM and really some of the purposes for that book.
So about 4 or 5 years ago, I met with a nun, and And this nun invited me to be a part of this thing here in Indianapolis called Spirit in Place. And the idea behind Spirit in Place is how can we help Indianapolis be a place with more spirit and be a better place? And so she said, hey, I want to do what you do. And I said, well, what is that? She says, I want us to present something around helping parents. And I said, that's great. We can do that, but that's not really what I want to do. And she says, well, what would you want to do? And I said, I wanted to share with the world this ideal about building a nano community. And she said, what is that? And I said, well, it doesn't exist anywhere. It's just in my head. And so each week she would invite me back and challenge me to further develop this nano community ideal. Well, I couldn't get adults to understand that. So my son and I decided to just write a book with the lead character being this young man named Stem who lived in this nano community. And so that's the origin of the book, a community where homes are 3D printed, where homes cost fewer than $5,000, where all the homes are fitted with solar and wind so that energy is free for communities that otherwise have problems paying electrical bills, where there are aero farms, so they're no longer food deserts. So, and we wanted to do that and bring that to life through the eyes of children.
Yeah, and it really does a great job of teaching so many different aspects of important things in life outside of what you just said. You know, I don't want to give the book away, but you know, there's some teamwork, some real teamwork going on within the family, and there's some you know, empathy and some understanding of when, you know, someone really needs help with something and then someone else stepping up to help them. So I think there's so many different components in that book that teachers especially can present this book to students. They could do a whole study on it. They could pull out each component and they just read it for entertainment, and parents too. So I think that's such a great work that you've done there. So I wanted to make sure, and you know, when we talk about your books and your things, we'll throw all those things out so our listeners can find them where they want them. But you've also written It's a Jungle Out There, What Are We Going to Do Today, which I love. I really, really, really love What Are We Going to Do Today. I hate to say it, but I think that might be one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. I know. Yep. And you've both worked on Stop the Bus together, I believe. So if you haven't, people haven't seen the What Are We Going to Do Today that his son wrote, please get it. It's really going to help me.
You know what's unique about that is I used to tweet quite a bit early on, and he decided to take some of the tweets that I used and turn those tweets into action items for parents. And the interesting thing is I said to him, you know, you need to write a book. And he's like, man, I don't have time to write a book. I'm trying to get my degree, blah, blah, blah. And I said, man, you need to write a book. Why? I said, because the book in some ways is the thing that continues to separate you from your peers. And it shows that you care about something greater than yourself. You can say it, but then if people can pick it up. And so it's interesting that you would say that's your favorite book, because I had to twist his arm and hit him upside the head a few times to convince him to do it.
Yeah, we'll have to let him know it's my favorite.
I will definitely do.
So in a lot of the presentations and a lot of the conversations that you have with parents and teachers, you talk a lot about the backward design model. And I know that educators, if you know, we have a listener base of administrators and educators, that we have talked about the backward design model in strategic planning for students for performance standards and learning standards, but I don't think I've ever heard it until you talked about in raising of children, teaching of students, and just modeling good human beings from small children up as a backward design model. So dive into what you mean when you say the backward design modeling in parenting.
Sure. So backward design, originally is actually an educational model, and so the ideal is to find a way to look, and sort of like with GPS, to know exactly where you want to go and then figure out what steps you need to take. My concern as a parent was I had no idea what I was doing. So when the hospital 18 hours or so, however long it is after you have a child before they put you out, when the hospital says you have to go, I had the instructions on how to put a car seat in. I had no idea on what I was going to be doing as a parent, not even in that moment, but certainly not when you start thinking about, well, how do I get this little baby one day out of my house to be productive, to never want to come back to my house? Now, as time has gone by, I would love for my son to stay and live with me as long as possible. But at the time you're thinking, well, how do I do that? And the only way to do that for me was to think about, well, what I would like for that child to happen in the future, and then then take those steps to work backwards. So there's three elements to backward design that we look at, which is one, I wanted my child to be intellectually ambitious, which is very different from being a good student. I wanted him to be a critical thinker and be more interested in enlightenment and mastery than just being able to pass tests. The second element was that I wanted, I should just say my child, my wife will listen to this and say, but I'm the one who gave him life. But I wanted our child to be globally and culturally competent, because we live in a very large world, but the world is also very small. Today, people can have conversations with people anywhere in the world, just as you and I are today. And I thought it was important that he understood and valued other people's cultures and histories and so forth. And the other part, that he could sometimes speak other people's languages, because that's hugely important. And the third element is that I wanted him to be humanitarian driven, that I wanted his life to have a purpose beyond money or grades or degrees or any kind of accolades. I was really concerned about who he'd be at the end of the day, which I think is the most important word in the whole human language, is the word who. It's an undervalued word. People don't talk about it enough, but it shows up on our tombstones. It shows up in our obituary. It shows up in our eulogy. So I wanted to make sure that who he was somebody that when his life was over, we could all be proud of.
Well, and I think that those things are so important. And as teachers and parents and anybody that is involved in the raising up of a child, right? Because it takes a village. It's not just one person doing it, as your wife said. It's not your child, Nate.
It's not. He's not my child. He's not my child.
Oh boy. But it is really truly some of the most important stuff, because as you said, when you pass away on your tombstone, it's not going to say what a great test taker you were. It's not going to say that you mastered all the standards, the Common Core standards in 11th grade. It's not going to say that you memorized the periodic table of elements. Nobody cares.
No, absolutely.
At the end of your life. And so talk a little bit about, and if you want to break all those three things up, you can. If you want to take them one at a time, if you have parents or teachers that are listening saying, yes, 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 but how, when we get so caught up in all the other things.
So I'll break it up into three more elements. So this is the part of the backward design that education uses. So education talks about things that you are familiar with, things that you master, and we call it things that are at your core. So I'd ask parents to say, if you could raise a jack of all trades, what kinds of things would you want your child to have some familiarity with? And for me, I wanted my child to have a large understanding of a lot of things. He didn't have to master them all, but I wanted him to be familiar with a lot of things. I think it makes children very interesting when you can walk into a room and have a conversation with a child any age, and the child can talk about a multitude of things. So we wanted to raise him to do that. So how do you do that? Well, you introduce your child to a number of things. So before Nine came home from the hospital, before we even knew what we were having, we wrote Harvard and got an application. And we used the application from Harvard because in terms of where we wanted him to end up in terms of education was to be able to qualify for a school like Harvard. So that's where we started. And Harvard tells you, right, you've got to be a great student. So if you've got this infant, well, what do you do with an infant? Well, you start reading to the infant and you dance and you sing. And there's so much literature about like what to do to stimulate a child's mind or brain early on. So we just did those things. We introduced him to other languages. We played language tapes in his crib. We didn't have any money. The language tapes today, I mean, families have Duolingo and all kinds of other apps and gadgets available to them. So it's always surprising to me when people say, well, I don't know what to do. I'm like, but there's all kinds of stuff available to you for free. So that was the first part. The second part was the mastery piece, which is that there are things we realize he's going to need to master in the 21st century. Some of those things are science, technology, engineering, math. As much as people balk at the ideal that every child shouldn't be an engineer or a mathematician or a scientist or technologist, the truth is that everything that we do today has some science, technology, engineering, and math involved in it. So I'm not suggesting that you have to do it, but you should master it enough so that it's on your buffet table. If you decide you don't want to be a journalist or a teacher and you want to be a math professor, you've at least mastered the requirements so you can do that. And then the last part, again, it sort of goes back to the who, which is at the core of your being. If people could only have a 30-second conversation with you in an elevator, what would you tell them? So I would, say to Naeem, who are you? And if you're on the elevator with someone, who do you tell them are? You can't tell them I'm great at math and I'm great at science. People want to know who you are at the core of your being. And so what do you tell them? And as time has gone on and we've had incidents with like police shootings and young Black men being shot, and this is not limited to young Black men, but I'll just say it because I have a Black child. One of the things I will always be aware of is how the media would then define who that child was. And that's hugely problematic for me. And I'm like, well, you know why the media is so able to define who the child is? Because the parents never defined publicly who their own child was. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to make sure that we didn't leave that stone unturned, that we could define who he was. And if you met him, you would know him similarly. And if Jessica met him, she would know him similarly. And if Taylor met him, she would know him similarly. There'll be no question about who Naeem was, because that was a part of his maturation.
Mm-hmm. And so how does that model or that philosophy or those practices seep into the educational environment with teachers and relationships? Because that's a big part of who they are, who they become, their role models. And so as educators and teachers that might be listening to this, along with parents, they might be saying, that's great, that sounds wonderful, and yes, I agree, but I'm not their parent. So how can I be a part of that child's growth in those areas as well?
Well, I think one of the things is missing. My wife's an educator. It has been 25 plus years. And one of the things we have this conversation about is, how many times have we ever had a teacher ask us what are the hopes and dreams that a parent has, that the parent has? The teacher asked the parent that. And I've never had a teacher or a school administrator ever ask me what my hopes and dreams were for my child. So I think that's a great place to start a conversation. Many times parents haven't even thought about what their hopes and dreams are for their children. But if they can then think about it, if the teacher leads the conversation, then perhaps then we can start putting together some things in place to make those hopes and dreams become a reality. When, again, I grew up in Gary, I played biddy basketball, which is today AAU basketball. You didn't have to ask the parents whose kids were on the basketball court what their hopes and dreams were. It was clear that if you were playing AAU basketball or Pop Warner football or Little League baseball, when you're out on that field, more often than not, kids from environments like I grew up in are hoping and dreaming that one day they'll be, for me, it was the next Dr. J, but they're hoping to be the next LeBron or someone of that nature. So those coaches are well aware of that. But when you're in the classroom, what do we even imagine that the children want to be? Because the parents and the teachers and the students haven't had a conversation about that. So I would say that's a very good place to start.
Do you think that we put too much emphasis or more emphasis on academic success, on the grade that a student gets, and not enough on the humanity of that child?
I do. I guess I'm less concerned about grades and more concerned about mastery. I've seen kids with really great grades, and then when it comes to taking a standardized test, they do terrible on it. That's because they haven't mastered the material. I've seen kids do great with grades and have no empathy for anybody else. So I think, we have to have a well-rounded approach. I don't know that one thing is more important than the other. One thing can seem more important than the other when a child is lacking in a certain element, but I think the goal is to raise children who have a balance in terms of their intellectual abilities, their global cultural competency, and their humanitarian drive.
Yeah. And I think too, just listening to your points, I'm also thinking of, maybe if we pulled back a little bit on such an emphasis on grades, the ABC, D, F students or the below level students, that maybe those grades are impacting the kind of person that they're becoming. Maybe they're developing low self-esteem. Maybe they're developing, a fear of such and such. And that's going to sort of guide the path for who they become because of the grades and how they're treated because of grades. So, obviously that's a whole nother, we could probably talk about that for hours. And it's really a difficult change to make when, the grading system in schools has been around forever, and it doesn't seem to be changing in all places. Some places are trying to change that, but I do see a light at the end of the tunnel with some of this as well, Nate, because there's so much more work now in mental health for children and SEL the social emotional learning for children and really teaching to the whole child. And so I'm hoping that we stay on that path.
So am I. I am concerned that we don't get started early enough. So this weekend, I watched some of the stuff that happened in Chicago, 90 plus shootings, 16 deaths. There were a bunch of young people outside standing on top of police cars and those kinds of, like, I'm really concerned about what we're doing as parents, or should I say in some respect, what we're not doing. I just don't think that we place enough emphasis on that until the child does something that's bad. And then we say, hey, what are those parents doing? But very early, I just think we missed the boat. And I don't know if we can fix education if we don't find a way to get parents involved, I mean, really seriously involved at day one.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, we're talking a lot about raising our children to be successful. And you talk a lot about certain crutches that we've all heard about. It's, it's always on the news or here or there, and some of those crutches that you talk a little bit about are, for example, wealth, privilege, legacy status, fraud, bribery. Heard a lot about that in the news the last couple of years, cheating, or Adobe Photoshop. Oh, the internet. We can make anything we want look any way we want to, can't we?
Right.
And kids know, because they're smarter than we are with that stuff. So how can we as parents and teachers raise our kids without us relying on them? Because some parents are relying on that stuff too to get their kids through, and kids as well.
So I feel like oftentimes we use crutches when we haven't prepared. So I'll just use Naim. Naim is my example. So we live in a community now that there is some wealth in our community. We're not certainly amongst that elite group of people, but certainly when I first started as a financial advisor, my wife was in graduate school. I was starting a new business. I didn't have any money. I had a child. We lived in a raggedy apartment where above us was a drug dealer. But we couldn't not prepare our child simply because of our economic situation. So we had to find ways around it. And I just find it interesting, particularly when people find ways to get around a lot of other things to help. We're not as creative about ways to help our children. So I just never wanted to use the excuse that I didn't have enough money, because there's so many things that are free. That I should exhaust all of the free options before I start saying what's impossible for me to do. Now, along the way, I've met families who are wealthy. When my son played soccer, there was a family with a limo driver would drop them off at practice, and the nanny would get out and walk them onto the field. And I would see that if I saw that family today and I'd ask what your child is doing, and we were comparing the outcomes of our children, it's not even comparable. They had way more resources than I did, but they were not involved. They weren't invested in their child's life. So I think if you can get involved and get invested, and you have a clear-cut idea of where you want to go, you can do the work to get there. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but there is a path to get there if you have an ideal about what it is that you want, and you're unrelenting about making that happen.
Mm-hmm. And as you're saying, just because you don't have as many resources doesn't mean you won't be as good, as well prepared. I was just watching a show the other day where these kids were getting ready to go off to college, and they were coming from extremely wealthy families, and they had no idea how to cook anything for themselves, do a load of laundry. The mom was teaching these 18-year-old girls how to do a load of laundry. They didn't even know. I don't even think it was kind of funny, because one was like, is this the dryer? Which is which? And so I know it's like, so people that don't have that kind of wealth and privilege, their children, I can promise you, Nate, my children know how to do a load of laundry, right? Because kids that come from families that don't have that privilege, their children have to be a part of that. They have to know how to make a meal. They have to know how to make eggs and mac and cheese and chicken nuggets to survive. So my kids are going to be well prepared when they go to college. So, just because you have resources doesn't always mean you're going to be better prepared.
No, sometimes it means that because you have resources, you're going to act like because you have resources, you don't have to do anything, which then you set your children up for, huge failure. Not every child that comes from a privileged background actually does what they're supposed to do. Like, surprise, surprise. right? It happens all the time. But yeah, I just think if we can get more invested and have a clear-cut idea about where we want our children to go, the same way we do with our own careers. I think, being a parent is a profession, but we don't treat it like it's a profession. We treat it like it's like a hobby, and not a hobby that we're very interested in, but it's the thing you're going to spend more time doing, but yet we spend the least amount of time preparing to do successfully.
Yeah. In some of our previous conversations before we started this podcast, I had talked to you about something that I know that you speak about, and it is really it's kind of struck a nerve in me. And that is the common misunderstandings of parents and students in underserved or underrepresented demographics. And so talk a little bit about what some of those common misunderstandings are that a lot of folks have.
So one of the misunderstandings I think I have also politically, right? I'll start on the left. Sometimes it concerns me that on the left, folks are so concerned about stuff like anti-racism that we miss the point of why a child is in school, which is that they need to master math and reading and writing. And so I gotta have a Black teacher. Yeah, okay, that's fine, but is the teacher really qualified? Has that teacher mastered math or science so that teacher can teach those children effectively? Because the color of one's skin is not the most important thing. In fact, it's the furthest thing on the list. Then there's the other side that says, well, we don't want to, for example, teach anything around this discussion around critical race theory, which is also very misunderstood. So we lose sight of what's important, which is, how do we prepare the next generation of civic leaders? Right? How do we prepare the next generation of people who will stimulate and move forward the U.S. economy, or that will become the future presidents and congressmen and senators and business leaders and inventors? How do we do that if all we're ever going to do is argue about stuff that has very little to do with the preparation that children are going to have in a classroom, socially and emotionally and so forth?
Yeah. And I think that's so important today. It's more important today, I think, than it's been in the past, 20 years, because we're really coming to a place of understanding and empathy for people and understanding diversity and culture, other cultures, like you spoke about with wanting your child to know that. And I think that our listeners thinking about things in the backwards design model, I'm sure we have people listening there like, oh my gosh, where was he when I had my child? Because you really don't think about, okay, what kind of person do I want my kid to be? And then you work backwards from there. You just take every day as you can, because like you said, nobody writes a book. Well, I mean, a lot of people try to write a book, but it's not the book we need.
Someone should write that book.
Someone, maybe you. Maybe we could write it together.
We should do something together. Absolutely. Can I say something about the diversity piece real quick?
Yeah.
So I've had conversations. I've had a chance to present on this issue of diversity, and I'll have people in the audience who look like me, and then I'll say to the group, because that usually in America, when we think about diversity, is that if you're a person, quote unquote, of color, which is to suggest that even if you say you're white is a color. So it's like, well, what are we talking about? But if you're a person of color, that only then are you the person who's qualified to talk about what's diverse. And what you only want to qualify to talk about what's inclusive and what's equitable. And I would say to folks in the room, listen, I have a child who left the United States and moved to another country. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about global diversity. Now, how often have you even left your own community? Because that doesn't make you diverse because you are a person of color or you're a minority in the country. That doesn't make you diverse. Being diverse is being able to speak multiple languages. Being diverse is being able to understand other people's cultures and histories. That's what makes you diverse. So we confuse like the history of this country, the bad history of this country, with what it actually means to be diverse. And again, I think we lose sight of the humanity of all human beings when we do that.
Yeah, it's such a great point and just a really good way to think about it.
Yeah, I just try to say to folks, hey, how about we treat our own citizenry the way we treat foreign exchanges? And how about folks in a very community start to have domestic exchanges? And you just commit to once a week, leave your neighborhood, Go somewhere where people look different than you and have dinner or spend your money in that community, as opposed to having to have someone come in and lecture you once a year about your unconscious bias or anti-racist behavior and whatever other stuff that we come up with. But I believe that the way we get better is to spend time with each other.
Yeah, and I can promise you that would be a lot more powerful, and it would definitely stay with you a lot longer than to listen to someone come in and speak. Absolutely. Field trip.
right. Let's go somewhere else to have food or
absolutely
get your hair cut. I'm like, hey, America, we're
not going to deal with the hair. Well, we're going to stay away from getting a haircut.
But I don't have it. But I'm saying if we do, well, go to a dentist. But America, we value where we spend our money. And so then go spend your money in a community that's completely different than yours, and get to know the people who are there and why they work and who their children are and that kind of stuff. If you want us to improve, it seems like that's an option. And take your kids with you. Let them learn alongside of you. Take them with you. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Nate. Well, where can all of our listeners find you, your resources? Can they book you to come speak? What can we do here? Yeah, you can do all above. My other website is Nathaniel, Nathaniel Turner, Turner.com. And that's one of the websites we have. But if you go there, you can link to the blog, which is Raising Supaman, which is spelled just like the book, except Supaman is spelled Supaman, so that I don't get sued by DC Comics. but yeah, that's where you can find me at those two places. Thank you so much I know you're super busy, but I really appreciate you taking out your time to be on this episode. And I know we're going to continue to see great things come from you and your son. I appreciate it. And we're going to see great things from you. And you're going to write this book on parenting. Oh, no. So much pressure. From A to Z, from 0 to 18. Yes. All righty, everybody. This is Christy Houle for the Classroom Matters podcast, signing off. And don't forget to check out all of our other great resources on the Educate.Today website.